The wagon wheel slipped over the edge of the ravine, sending a shower of pebbles cascading into the abyss below. Willow Zimmerman clutched the seat with white knuckles as her entire world tilted precariously toward disaster. The horses whinnied in terror, their hooves scrambling for purchase on the crumbling dirt road that had betrayed her so completely. "Hold on." A deep voice shouted from somewhere behind her. "Don't move an inch." It was 1878 in the unforgiving territory of Colorado, and Willow was certain she was about to die. Her journey west had been fraught with hardship from the start, but nothing compared to this moment of pure terror as half her wagon hung suspended over a drop that would certainly kill her. Heavy boots pounded the earth, and suddenly a man appeared at the side of the wagon. Without hesitation, he gripped the rear axle, muscles bulging beneath his worn cotton shirt. His face contorted with effort as he dug his heels into the dirt and pulled backwards with impossible strength. "Mister, it's too heavy," Willow cried, tears streaming down her dust-covered cheeks. "Nothing's too heavy," he growled through clenched teeth. "Not when a life's at stake." The wagon creaked and groaned, inching backwards from certain doom. Willow remained frozen in place, afraid the slightest movement would send her plummeting to her death. The man's arms trembled with exertion, veins standing out like rivers on a map across his sun-bronzed skin. With one final Herculean effort, he yanked the wagon back onto solid ground, the impact nearly throwing Willow from her seat. The horses settled, still trembling but no longer in immediate danger. Willow finally released her death grip on the seat and turned to face her savior. He stood there catching his breath, hands on his knees, a battered cowboy hat shadowing his features. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice still shaking. "You saved my life." The man straightened and pushed his hat back, revealing piercing blue eyes set in a face weathered by sun and wind. He couldn't have been more than 30, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Name's Thomas Grayson," he said, extending a calloused hand. "And out here, madam, we don't let folks face trouble alone." Willow took his hand, noticing how gently he held hers despite the incredible strength he'd just displayed. "Willow Zimmerman. I was headed to Silverpine to meet my uncle." Thomas nodded, glancing at her wagon and the treacherous road ahead. "This trail's gotten worse since the spring floods, no place for someone to travel alone." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Silverpine's still 20 miles west, nightfall's coming soon." Willow smoothed her skirts, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I thought I could make it before dark. Clearly, I was mistaken. My ranch is just 2 miles back. You're welcome to rest there and continue your journey tomorrow." His offer was straightforward, his tone respectful. Willow hesitated. She'd left Philadelphia precisely to escape the controlling men in her life, her father, who'd tried to marry her off to a business associate 3 decades her senior, and the would-be suitor himself, who viewed her as little more than property to acquire. The last thing she wanted was to place herself in the debt of another man, even one who'd just saved her life. Yet as the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, Willow recognized the foolishness of continuing alone. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Grayson," she said finally. "I accept your offer." Thomas nodded, moving to check on her horses. "These 2 need rest and water. I'll lead you back." He climbed aboard his own horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that had been grazing nearby. As they began the careful journey back down the trail, Willow studied her rescuer from behind. His shoulders were broad beneath his simple shirt, his posture straight and confident in the saddle. Nothing like the soft, pampered men she'd known back east. The Grayson Ranch emerged from the landscape like an island of civilization in the wilderness, a sturdy 2-story house built of local timber, a large barn, corrals for livestock, and several smaller outbuildings. It wasn't grand by Eastern standards, but in this untamed territory, it represented remarkable achievement. "It's beautiful," Willow said honestly as they approached. Thomas glanced back at her, a hint of pride in his expression. "Built it with my own hands, took 3 years." You did this all yourself, had help from neighbors when I raised the barn. The rest was mostly me and time. He dismounted as they reached the front of the house. My father always said a man should build his own legacy. A woman emerged from the house, gray-haired and plump, with a kind face creased by smile lines. She wiped her hands on her apron, looking curiously at Willow. "Mrs. Elwood," Thomas called. "We have a guest. This is Miss Zimmerman. Her wagon nearly went over Widow's Ridge." The woman's eyes widened. "Lord have mercy. Come inside, dear. You must be shaken to the bone." Thomas helped Willow down from the wagon with strong, steady hands. "Mrs. Elwood keeps house for me. She'll see you comfortable while I tend to your horses." Before Willow could protest, Mrs. Elwood had swept her inside the house. To Willow's surprise, the interior was warm and inviting, polished wooden floors, comfortable furniture, and shelves lined with books. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the aroma of something delicious filled the air. "Sit yourself down, Miss Zimmerman. I'll fetch you some tea," Mrs. Elwood insisted, guiding her to a cushioned chair near the fire. "Please call me Willow," she said, still taking in her surroundings. "I don't mean to impose. Nonsense. We don't get many visitors out here, especially not young ladies." Mrs. Elwood bustled about, bringing a steaming cup of tea. "Mr. Grayson will be pleased to have company besides an old woman and his ranch hands." Willow sipped the tea gratefully. "He lives here alone." "Besides you and the workers, I mean." Mrs. Elwood's expression softened. "Yes, miss, has done since his wife passed 5 years ago." "Oh," Willow felt a pang of sympathy. "I didn't realize. Fever took her and their little one too," Mrs. Elwood said quietly. "Hardest thing I've ever seen a man endure, but he's carried on, building this place into something she'd have been proud of." Willow sat in silence, thinking of the man who'd saved her with such determination. She understood loss. Her mother had died when she was 16, leaving her alone with a father who saw her as a burden until she could be advantageously married off. Thomas returned as Mrs. Elwood was setting the table for supper. He'd washed up, his dark hair still damp at the temples. He'd changed into a clean shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. "Your horses are resting comfortably, Miss Zimmerman," he said. "And I've had one of my men take a look at your wagon. The axle's sound, but the wheel took some damage. We'll have it fixed by morning." "I can't thank you enough," Willow said, rising from her chair, "for everything." Something flickered in his blue eyes, perhaps surprise at her sincerity. "No thanks needed. I hope you'll join us for supper." The meal was simple but hearty: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Willow hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was before her. As they ate, Thomas asked about her journey. "I've come from Philadelphia," she explained. "My uncle Robert Zimmerman wrote that he'd staked a promising claim near Silverpine and offered me a place to stay." "Mining country," Thomas nodded. "Rough place for a lady." Willow straightened her shoulders. "I'm tougher than I look, Mr. Grayson. And I've had quite enough of Philadelphia society." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I meant no offense, Miss Zimmerman. Anyone who attempts Widow's Ridge alone has plenty of courage, or foolishness," she conceded with a small smile of her own. "Sometimes they're the same thing out here." He cut another piece of beef. "What skills do you bring to mining country, if you don't mind my asking?" "I was a teacher in Philadelphia, and I can keep accounts." Willow sipped her water. "My uncle mentioned the town needs both." "That they do," Thomas agreed. "Silverpine's growing fast." "Too fast, some might say." Mrs. Elwood, who had been quiet during most of the meal, spoke up. "Mr. Grayson, why don't you show Miss Zimmerman your library after supper? I've never seen so many books outside of a proper city." Thomas looked almost embarrassed. "Mrs. Elwood thinks my reading habits are unusual for a rancher." "They are," the older woman insisted. "Most men out here can barely write their names, and he's ordering books from as far as New York City." Willow's interest was piqued. "I'd love to see your collection." After supper, Thomas led her to a small room off the main living area. Shelves lined every wall, filled with leather-bound volumes. A comfortable chair sat near the window, beside a small table holding a lamp. "It's wonderful," Willow breathed, running her fingers along the spines. "Dickens, Hawthorne, Melville, you have excellent taste, Mr. Grayson." "Thomas, please," he said, watching her with interest. "My father was educated back east. He believed in the power of ideas, even out here in the wilderness." Willow pulled a volume of poetry from the shelf. "And what do you believe in?" His blue eyes held hers for a moment. "That wilderness and civilization need not be enemies, that we can build something meaningful here without destroying what makes this land special." Willow felt something shift inside her, a recognition of a kindred spirit, perhaps. "That's a beautiful philosophy." They talked for hours as the night deepened around the ranch. Thomas told her about his journey west as a young man, his dreams for his ranch, the challenges of the frontier. Willow shared stories of her life in Philadelphia, her frustrations with society's expectations, and her hopes for a new beginning. "It's getting late," Thomas finally said, though he seemed reluctant to end their conversation. "I've had a room prepared for you upstairs." Willow nodded, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "Thank you for everything, Thomas, not just for saving my life, but for your hospitality." "It's been my pleasure, Willow." The way he said her name made her heart beat a little faster. "Sleep well." The bedroom was simple but comfortable, with a quilt-covered bed and a small dresser. A pitcher and bowl sat atop it for washing, and Mrs. Elwood had left a clean nightgown. Willow changed, marveling at the strange turn her journey had taken. She'd expected hardship on the frontier, but not kindness from a stranger with sad eyes and a library full of books. She slept deeply that night, more peacefully than she had since leaving Philadelphia. Morning brought the smell of coffee and bacon. Willow dressed quickly in her travel clothes, which Mrs. Elwood had somehow managed to clean and press overnight. When she came downstairs, Thomas was already at the table studying a ledger. "Good morning," he said, rising when she entered. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Elwood poured for her. "Is my wagon ready?" A shadow crossed Thomas's face. "About that, my man Jenkins found more damage than we initially thought. The repairs will take another day, maybe two." Willow set down her cup. "Oh, I should send word to my uncle. He'll be expecting me." "Already done," Thomas assured her. "I sent one of my hands to Silverpine at first light with a message explaining the delay. He'll return by nightfall with any reply." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Willow. "You've thought of everything." "Not everything," Thomas said with unexpected humor. "I haven't figured out how to keep Mrs. Elwood from trying to fatten up every visitor who crosses our threshold." The housekeeper sniffed as she set a plate of eggs and bacon before Willow. "Some folks appreciate proper feeding, Mr. Grayson." After breakfast, Thomas surprised Willow with an offer. "Would you like to see the ranch? It's a fine day for riding if you're up to it." The prospect of being trapped indoors all day didn't appeal to Willow. Besides, she was curious about this man and the world he'd built. "I'd like that very much." Thomas brought around 2 horses, his chestnut stallion and a gentle mare with a white blaze. He helped Willow mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The touch sent an unexpected warmth through her. "You ride well," he observed as they set off. Willow smiled. "My mother insisted. She said a lady should know how to handle a horse properly, not just perch on one for show." "A wise woman," Thomas replied, leading them toward a ridge overlooking the valley. The day was glorious, clear blue skies stretching endlessly over the mountains, wildflowers dotting the meadows, and the distant glint of a river winding through the landscape. Thomas pointed out landmarks and boundaries, speaking with pride about the improvements he'd made over the years. "It wasn't much when I arrived," he explained as they paused atop the ridge. "Just a run-down cabin and overgrazed land. Most folks thought I was crazy to try making something of it." "But you proved them wrong," Willow said, taking in the thriving ranch below. Thomas nodded. "It takes vision to see what could be instead of what is, and patience to make it happen." They rode down to the river, where they dismounted to let the horses drink. Willow removed her gloves, dipping her fingers into the cool water. "It's beautiful here," she said softly, "so different from the city." Thomas watched her, something unreadable in his expression. "Do you think you could be happy in a place like this, so far from everything you've known?" The question caught Willow off guard. I think happiness depends less on where you are than who you're with." She met his gaze directly. "Don't you?" For a moment, neither spoke. Then Thomas looked away, focusing on the distant mountains. "I used to think so. After Catherine died, I wasn't sure of anything anymore." Willow's heart ached for his loss. "Mrs. Elwood told me. I'm so sorry, Thomas. It was a long time ago." His voice was quiet. "But there are days when the emptiness of this place feels like it might swallow me whole." Willow understood that feeling all too well, the hollowness that followed loss, the way the world kept turning despite your grief. She'd felt it after her mother's death, amplified by her father's cold indifference. "Does it get easier?" she asked, though she knew the answer. Thomas considered her question seriously. "Not easier, different. You build a life around the absence, like a river changing course around a boulder it can't move." They stood in companionable silence for a while, watching the river flow. When they finally remounted and continued their tour, something had shifted between them, a shared understanding that needed no words. Thomas showed her the cattle herds, the vegetable gardens that supplied the ranch, and finally the small orchard he'd planted when he first arrived. "The trees were just saplings then," he explained as they walked among rows of apple and pear trees. "Everyone said they wouldn't survive the winters here." Willow touched the rough bark of an apple tree, "But you believed they would." "I needed to believe in something that would outlast me," Thomas said simply, "something that would grow stronger with time." By the time they returned to the house, the sun was beginning its descent. Willow was tired but exhilarated from the day outdoors. As Thomas helped her down from her horse, his hands lingered at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him, "for showing me your world." Something flickered in his eyes, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for seeing it." That evening after supper, Thomas's ranch hand returned from Silverpine with a letter from Willow's uncle. As she read it, her expression fell. "Is everything all right?" Thomas asked. Willow refolded the letter carefully. "My uncle writes that he's been called away to Denver on urgent business. He won't return for at least 2 weeks." She looked up, uncertainty in her eyes. "He suggests I delay my arrival until then." "You're welcome to stay here," Thomas said immediately, "for as long as you need." Mrs. Elwood nodded enthusiastically. "Oh yes, Miss Zimmerman." "It would be no trouble at all." Willow hesitated. "That's very generous, but I couldn't impose." "It's not an imposition," Thomas insisted. "The room is sitting empty otherwise," and he paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "And I've enjoyed your company." Something in his honest admission touched Willow deeply. "Then I accept, with gratitude." The next days fell into a pleasant rhythm. Willow's wagon was repaired, but she no longer felt rushed to continue her journey. In the mornings, she would help Mrs. Elwood with household tasks, learning the practical skills of frontier life that her Eastern education hadn't provided. In the afternoons, she often rode out with Thomas as he tended to ranch business or explored his library, discovering shared favorites and debating ideas. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire talking until Mrs. Elwood pointedly began yawning and excusing herself to bed. Thomas told Willow about his childhood in Ohio, his journey west with his father, and later, meeting Catherine in Denver and bringing her to the ranch as his bride. She found it terribly lonely at first, he admitted one night, but she had such determination. Started planting flowers around the house, insisted on curtains for the windows, said if we were going to live in the wilderness, we didn't have to live like wild things. Willow smiled at the image. "She sounds remarkable." She was. Thomas stared into the fire. "When she died, I nearly sold everything and left, couldn't bear the memories." "What made you stay?" Willow asked softly. Thomas considered the question. "Stubbornness at first, then gradually purpose. This land needs careful stewardship. I found meaning in that." Willow told him about her own losses, her mother's death, her father's emotional distance, and finally, his attempt to marry her off to Howard Blackstone, a business associate 30 years her senior. He announced the engagement at a dinner party, she recalled bitterly. Without even discussing it with me first. When I refused, he threatened to cut me off without a penny. Thomas's expression darkened. That's unconscionable. So I wrote to my uncle, Willow continued. He sent money for my passage west, said Silverpine needed a schoolteacher. I left the next week. Brave, Thomas said, his admiration evident. Willow shook her head. Desperate, more like. I couldn't bear the thought of being Howard Blackstone's ornament, trotted out at parties and then ignored. Marriage should be a partnership, Thomas said firmly. Catherine and I didn't always agree, but we respected each other. Anything less isn't worth the vows. As days turned into a week, Willow found herself watching Thomas when he wasn't looking the way sunlight caught in his dark hair. How his hands moved confidently, whether handling a horse or turning the pages of a book. The rare but transformative nature of his smile. She told herself it was gratitude she felt, or perhaps the natural affinity of two people who shared similar values. But in quiet moments, she admitted the truth: she was falling in love with Thomas Grayson. The revelation both thrilled and terrified her. Thomas had shown no indication that he saw her as anything more than a guest, a pleasant companion during her unexpected stay. His heart seemed firmly anchored in the past, loyal to Catherine's memory. One afternoon, a spring storm rolled in suddenly while they were checking fence lines on the far side of the property. The sky darkened ominously, and within minutes, rain began to pour down in sheets. "There's a line shack just over that rise," Thomas shouted over the thunder. "We can wait it out there." They urged their horses forward, reaching the small cabin just as lightning split the sky. Inside, the shelter was basic but dry: a table, 2 chairs, a small stove, and a narrow cot. Thomas immediately set about lighting the stove. "You're soaked through," he said, concern evident in his voice. "There should be some dry blankets in that trunk." Willow found the blankets and wrapped one around her shoulders, shivering. Outside, the storm raged, rain lashing against the windows. "I don't think it's passing quickly," Thomas observed, adding wood to the now crackling stove. "We might be here a while." Willow nodded, moving closer to the warmth. "At least we're dry." Thomas stood nearby, his own clothes clinging to his frame. Droplets of water glistened in his hair and on his face. For a moment their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Thomas looked away first. "You should sit by the stove. I'll see if there's any coffee stored here." As he moved around the small space, Willow watched him, her heart racing. The confined quarters made his presence seem even more imposing, more immediate. When he accidentally brushed against her while reaching for a tin on a high shelf, she couldn't suppress a small gasp. "I'm sorry," he said immediately, stepping back. "Don't be," Willow replied, the words escaping before she could stop them. Thomas stilled, searching her face. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. "Willow," he began, his voice rough. A crash of thunder shook the cabin, breaking the moment. Thomas returned to preparing coffee, his movements measured and deliberate. They sat across from each other at the small table as the storm continued, sipping the hot drink and talking of inconsequential things. But something had changed. A door had been cracked open that couldn't quite be closed again. When the rain finally subsided, they rode back to the ranch in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. That evening at dinner, Mrs. Elwood noticed the tension. "Is everything all right?" she asked, looking between them. "You both seem quiet tonight." "Just tired from the ride," Thomas answered quickly. The storm made for difficult going. Willow excused herself early, claiming fatigue. In the privacy of her room, she paced, trying to make sense of her feelings. She hadn't come west looking for love, quite the opposite. She'd been running from an unwanted match, seeking independence and purpose. Yet here she was, her heart pulled toward a man who might never be ready to love again. Who might see her feelings as a betrayal of the wife he'd lost. who might send her on her way to Silverpine with nothing but kind wishes once her uncle returned. The next morning, Willow rose early and went to the kitchen, hoping to help Mrs. Elwood with breakfast. Instead, she found Thomas already there, drinking coffee alone. "Good morning," she said, suddenly self-conscious. He looked up, his blue eyes serious. "Willow, I was hoping to speak with you." Her heart raced. "Of course. I've been thinking about your situation," he began carefully. "Your uncle won't return for another week at least. I wonder if you might consider staying here longer." Willow blinked in surprise. "Longer? The school in Silverpine won't open until autumn," Thomas continued. "But the children here on the ranch and neighboring properties have no teacher at all. If you were willing, you could start a small school here." "Here," Willow repeated, trying to understand what he was offering. Thomas nodded, watching her closely. "There's a building by the orchard that would serve well enough with some work. I'd provide room and board, plus a fair wage." Willow's thoughts whirled. Was this simply a neighborly offer to a woman in need of employment, or was there more behind it? "It's a generous proposal," she said carefully. "But I promised my uncle." "I understand," Thomas interrupted. "It was just a thought. Forget I mentioned it." He rose to leave, but Willow reached out, catching his arm. "Wait, I didn't say no." Thomas looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then back to her face. "What are you saying, Willow?" She took a deep breath. "I'm saying I need to understand why you're asking me to stay." The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Then Thomas gently took her hand in his. "Because the thought of you leaving makes this place seem empty already," he admitted, his voice low. "Because in just these few days, you've brought something back to this ranch that I thought was gone forever." Willow's heart soared, but caution held her back. "Thomas, I don't want to be a replacement for what you've lost." "You couldn't be," he said with surprising fierceness. "Catherine will always be part of my past, but these feelings," he paused, struggling for words, "these feelings are new, unexpected, and entirely about you, Willow." She stepped closer to him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I feel it too," she whispered, "but I'm afraid." "Of what?" His hand came up to touch her cheek, so gently it made her want to cry. "Of hoping for too much," she admitted. "Of building dreams on shifting sand." Thomas's eyes never left hers. "Then we'll build slowly, one day at a time, no promises beyond what we can honestly give." Willow nodded, leaning slightly into his touch. "I'd like to stay, to teach the children, and to see where this might lead." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'd like that too." He bent his head slowly, giving her every chance to step away. Instead, Willow raised her face to his, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, questioning, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they parted, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected you, Willow Zimmerman." She smiled, joy bubbling up within her. "I never expected any of this, but I'm grateful for every bit of it, even the wagon nearly going over that cliff." Thomas chuckled, the sound warming her from within. "I'm rather partial to that part myself." Mrs. Elwood's arrival in the kitchen forced them to step apart, though the older woman's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "Well," she said briskly, setting down a basket of eggs, "seems like it's going to be a fine day." Over the next week, Thomas and his men worked to convert the old storage building near the orchard into a schoolroom. Willow helped design the space, marveling at how readily Thomas implemented her suggestions. Together they built benches and desks, ordered books and slates, and spread word to neighboring ranches about the new school. In the evenings, they would walk together through the orchard, talking about their hopes for the future. Thomas spoke of expanding the ranch, perhaps adding sheep to the cattle operation. Willow shared her ideas for the school, her dreams of bringing education to children who might otherwise go without. Sometimes they would stand beneath the stars, Thomas's arm around her waist, and simply exist together in comfortable silence. Other times, their conversations would stretch late into the night, exploring ideas and sharing experiences. "I need to write to my uncle," Willow said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. To explain my decision to stay here. Thomas nodded, his fingers lightly stroking hers. What will you tell him? Willow smiled. The truth. That I found an opportunity to teach sooner than expected, that I've found a place that already feels like home. And about us? Thomas asked, his voice careful. That too, Willow said softly. That I've met someone who makes me see possibilities I never imagined. Thomas lifted her hand to his lips. I love you, Willow. I didn't think I'd ever say those words to anyone again, but there they are, simple and true. Tears pricked at Willow's eyes. I love you too, Thomas. It happened so quickly, but I've never been more certain of anything. The schoolroom opened the following Monday with 8 students ranging in age from 6 to 15. Willow discovered she loved teaching even more on the frontier, where education was valued as precious rather than taken for granted. The children were eager to learn, and their parents expressed profound gratitude for her efforts. Thomas would often find excuses to visit during the school day, bringing fresh apples from the orchard or stopping by to fix a loose window. The children quickly picked up on the connection between their teacher and the rancher, giggling behind their hands when the adults exchanged glances. A letter arrived from Willow's uncle, expressing surprise at her decision but offering his blessing. He wrote that he would visit once he returned from Denver, curious to meet the man who had so quickly captured his niece's heart. As promised, Robert Zimmerman arrived at the ranch 2 weeks later, a robust man in his 50s with Willow's same determined chin. Thomas welcomed him warmly, showing him the school and the improvements they were making to the property. That evening over dinner, Robert studied the couple thoughtfully. I must say, this is not what I expected when I invited my niece west, he remarked, cutting into his steak. But I haven't seen Willow smile like this since her mother was alive. Willow reached for Thomas's hand under the table. It wasn't what I expected either, Uncle Robert, but sometimes the unexpected turns out to be exactly what you need. Later, when the men were enjoying cigars on the porch, Robert turned to Thomas with a serious expression. You seem like a good man, Grayson, and it's clear you care for my niece, but Willow's had enough disappointment in her life. I need to know your intentions. Thomas met the older man's gaze directly. I intend to ask for her hand with your blessing, not to own her or control her, but to build a life together as equal partners. Robert nodded slowly. Then you have my blessing. Though I suspect Willow would proceed with, or without it, she's got her mother's spirit. That she does, Thomas agreed with a smile. It's one of the many things I love about her. The next day, Thomas took Willow riding to the ridge where they'd first viewed the ranch together. As they dismounted to enjoy the spectacular view, Thomas seemed unusually nervous. What's on your mind? Willow asked, noticing how he kept touching his pocket. Thomas took a deep breath. When I pulled your wagon back from that cliff's edge, I had no idea I was really saving my own future. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his. Before you, I was existing, not living, going through motions, doing what needed to be done, but without real purpose or joy. Willow felt tears forming in her eyes as Thomas continued. You've brought light back into my world, Willow. You've helped me see that grief doesn't have to be the end of happiness, that the heart can heal and grow and love again. He dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Willow Zimmerman, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Of building a life and a future together on this land. The ring inside was a simple gold band with a small sapphire that caught the sunlight. It was my grandmother's, Thomas explained. Catherine's ring is put away for our future daughter if we're so blessed. Willow was deeply touched by his thoughtfulness, his respect for his past, and his hope for their future. Yes, she whispered, her voice catching with emotion. Yes, Thomas Grayson, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms. Their kiss was deeper now, filled with promise and certainty. When? Thomas asked when they finally parted. I don't want to wait long, but I want to give you the wedding you deserve. Willow smiled up at him. The harvest festival is in 6 weeks. Everyone from miles around will already be gathering. What do you think? Thomas's face lit with happiness. Perfect. Mrs. Elwood will be beside herself with planning. Indeed, the housekeeper was ecstatic when they shared their news, immediately beginning lists of preparations needed. Robert Zimmerman extended his stay to assist with arrangements, and to help Willow write to the few friends from Philadelphia she wished to invite. The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy but joyful. Thomas and his men built an addition to the house, a larger bedroom with a connecting sitting room where Willow could grade papers and prepare lessons. Willow worked with Mrs. Elwood to order fabric for curtains and bedding, learning to sew in the evenings. Word spread quickly throughout the territory. Families from neighboring ranches brought gifts, handmade quilts, preserved foods, practical items for their home. The sheriff from Silverpine rode out to offer congratulations and to tell Willow the town still hoped she might consider teaching there eventually. "We're planning to expand the school here," Thomas told him. "Perhaps a proper building by next year with room for more students." The sheriff nodded appreciatively. "Always thinking ahead, Grayson. The territory needs more men like you." As the wedding day approached, Willow found herself reflecting on the incredible turn her life had taken. Just months ago, she had been trapped in Philadelphia, facing a future that filled her with dread. Now she stood on the threshold of a life that excited and inspired her, with a man who viewed her as an equal partner. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. The ranch was transformed, lanterns hanging from trees, wildflowers arranged in mason jars, tables set up near the orchard. Mrs. Elwood and women from neighboring ranches had been cooking for days, preparing a feast to celebrate the union. In the bedroom that would soon be theirs together, Willow dressed with trembling fingers. Her wedding gown was simple but elegant ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, ordered from Denver based on her measurements. Her uncle had insisted on this extravagance, calling it his wedding gift. A knock at the door revealed Mrs. Elwood, her eyes misty. "Oh, Miss Willow, you look beautiful, like an angel." "Thank you for everything," Willow said, embracing the older woman, "for welcoming me, for your kindness." Mrs. Elwood patted her cheek affectionately. "You've brought life back to this house, dear, to all of us, but especially to him." Another knock announced her uncle, handsome in his best suit. "Ready, my dear." "Your groom is waiting, looking as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs." Willow laughed, taking his arm. "I'm ready." The ceremony took place beneath the apple trees, now heavy with ripening fruit. Thomas stood waiting, tall and proud in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Willow as she walked toward him on her uncle's arm. The preacher from Silverpine spoke of commitment, partnership, and love that endures through hardship. Willow and Thomas exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises to support and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When Thomas slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady but his voice thick with emotion. "With this ring I thee wed. I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Their kiss was met with cheers and applause from the gathered community. As they turned to face their guests, Willow felt a sense of rightness so profound it nearly overwhelmed her. The celebration lasted well into the night. There was feasting and dancing, music from fiddles and guitars, toasts and well wishes from friends and neighbors. Thomas never strayed far from Willow's side, his hand often finding hers, his eyes meeting hers across the crowd with private messages of love. When the last guests had departed and the ranch was quiet again, Thomas led Willow back to their home. At the threshold, he paused. "I believe there's a tradition," he said with a smile, before sweeping her into his arms and carrying her inside. Their first night as husband and wife was a revelation, tender and passionate, filled with discoveries and promises whispered in the darkness. Afterward, Willow lay in Thomas's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Happy, he asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Completely, she answered truthfully. And you, his arms tightened around her. More than I ever thought possible again. Life settled into new rhythms after the wedding. Willow continued teaching while also embracing her role as mistress of the ranch. She learned about cattle and crop rotation, how to preserve food for winter, and the countless other skills required of a frontier wife. Thomas supported her teaching wholeheartedly, often discussing her students' progress and helping to build additional equipment for the school. Together they planned for expansion, drawing up designs for a proper schoolhouse that could accommodate more children from the surrounding area. Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by November. The cozy evenings by the fire became even more precious, with Thomas reading aloud while Willow worked on mending or graded student papers. Sometimes they would simply talk for hours, sharing thoughts and dreams. Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. As the land awakened from winter's grip, Willow discovered she was expecting their first child. When she shared the news with Thomas, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for, joy mingled with tenderness, excitement tempered with protective concern. "A baby," he whispered, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child." Willow covered his hand with hers. "Are you happy?" His eyes, when they met hers, shone with unshed tears. Beyond words. As Willow's pregnancy progressed, Thomas became increasingly protective, insisting she reduce her teaching hours and hiring additional help for the household. Yet he was careful never to smother her independence, understanding that her work gave her purpose and satisfaction. The schoolhouse they had planned was completed that summer, a sturdy building with large windows to capture the light and a small bell tower. Enrollment grew to 15 students, with more expected in the autumn. By late summer, Willow's condition was obvious. Her students were fascinated by her expanding waistline, and the community surrounded the couple with support and advice, some welcome, some less so. "Mrs. Peterson says I should be drinking beef broth 3 times daily," Willow reported with amusement one evening. "And Mrs. Taylor insists I must not raise my arms above my head, or the cord will wrap around the baby's neck." Thomas laughed, pulling her gently onto his lap despite her protests about her weight. "And what does Mrs. Elwood say?" "That I should listen to my body and ignore old wives' tales," Willow replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "She's been surprisingly sensible." Thomas pressed a kiss to her temple. "Smart woman, that's why I keep her around." Their daughter arrived on a crisp October morning after a difficult but ultimately uncomplicated labor. Thomas had refused to leave Willow's side despite the midwife's objections, holding her hand and whispering encouragement through each contraction. When the tiny, red-faced infant was placed in Willow's arms, both parents were rendered speechless by the perfection of their creation. "She's beautiful," Thomas finally managed, his voice rough with emotion. "Like her mother." They named her Elizabeth Hope Elizabeth for Willow's mother, and hope for the future they were building together. Mrs. Elwood was besotted with the baby, insisting on helping whenever possible so Willow could rest. Thomas would often be found simply watching his daughter sleep, his expression one of wonder and fierce protectiveness. Parenthood brought new challenges and deeper bonds. Nights of interrupted sleep, the worry when Elizabeth developed her first fever, the overwhelming joy of her first smile, they weathered it all together. Their partnership growing stronger with each experience shared. By Elizabeth's first birthday, the ranch had expanded further. Thomas had added sheep as planned, and a new barn had been raised with the help of neighbors. The school now had a proper assistant, a young woman from Denver who had answered their advertisement and proved to be a capable teacher in her own right. This allowed Willow to balance motherhood with her passion for education, overseeing the curriculum while sharing teaching duties. Elizabeth often accompanied her to school, charming the older students who took turns entertaining her. On the anniversary of the day Thomas had pulled Willow's wagon back from the cliff's edge, they rode together to that same spot, Elizabeth secure in her father's arms. 2 years ago, I thought I was facing death, Willow mused, looking out over the valley that had become her home. Instead, I was finding life. Thomas shifted Elizabeth to his other arm, reaching out to take Willow's hand. Do you ever regret it, not making it to Silverpine as planned? Willow turned to him, her heart full of love for this man who had become her everything. Not for a single moment. This is where I was meant to be with you, building something that matters. Thomas leaned over to kiss her, soft and sweet, while Elizabeth patted both their faces with chubby hands. I love you, Willow Grayson, he said simply. More with each passing day, and I love you, she replied. For saving my life in more ways than one. They rode home together as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land they cultivated and cared for, a family forged by chance, strengthened by choice, and bound by love that had grown from the most unexpected of beginnings. Years later, when Elizabeth was joined by 2 brothers and the Grayson Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the territory, Willow would still sometimes pause at that bend in the road where her wagon had once teetered on the brink of disaster. She would remember the terror of that moment, and then the sight of a stranger using all his strength to pull her back from the edge. Life, she had learned, often hinged on such moments, split-second decisions, chance encounters, circumstances that seemed like misfortune but led to unexpected joy. Her near tragedy had become the foundation of her greatest happiness, a story told and retold to their children and eventually their grandchildren. And through it all, Thomas remained by her side, her partner, her love, her cowboy who had once pulled a wagon back with his bare hands and in doing so had rescued not just her life but her heart.